Picture this. A ranger is doing a routine patrol near a watering hole when a wild elephant matriarch steps out of the tree line, calf trailing behind her, and just stops. Doesn't charge, doesn't retreat. She nudges the calf forward a few steps, close enough for the ranger to see a swollen, infected wound on its front leg. And then she waits, just stands there, watching him, like she's saying, "Your turn."
That's not a fluke. That's not a one-off viral moment. It's part of a pattern that shows up again and again across species that share almost nothing biologically, in places that have nothing to do with each other. And once you start looking closely, the explanation gets a lot more interesting than animals just like us.
Quick question before we go further, because I actually want to know, have you ever had a wild or stray animal trust you with something vulnerable? A kitten, a bird, a litter, anything? Drop it in the comments, because some of these stories are genuinely wild, and I read every single one.
So here's the obvious question first. Why would any wild animal wired by millions of years of evolution to treat unfamiliar, oversized, unpredictable creatures as threats willingly walk up to a human and present its own offspring? We've spent roughly 10,000 years hunting, displacing, caging, and occasionally domesticating nearly every species we've encountered. By any reasonable evolutionary logic, animals should treat us the way you treat a stranger circling your house at night. Instead, over and over, we see the opposite. We see trust, specifically at the exact moment it matters most.
Let's start with something small and familiar. Cats. If you've ever fed a stray, you already know where this is going. Feral and semi-feral cat colonies have a long, well-documented pattern of bringing kittens, sick, newborn, sometimes barely alive, to specific humans. Not random people, specific ones. The person who leaves food out. The neighbor who once pulled a thorn from a paw and apparently signed an invisible contract they didn't know existed. Cats build what researchers describe as a running mental map of the humans around them. Who's calm, who's predictable, who's food providing, versus who's loud, erratic, or prone to shooing them off. Once a cat files you under safe, you're not just tolerated anymore. You're something closer to an honorary member of the colony, and honorary members get access to the kittens.
Now here's where it gets stranger, because this same test-then-trust pattern shows up in animals that are nowhere near domesticated. Dolphins and whales have a documented history of approaching boats specifically when a calf is injured or entangled. It's eerily deliberate. Researchers and fishermen have described mother whales positioning an injured calf directly beside a boat and simply holding position, waiting. Marine biologists point to cetacean social complexity as the likely driver here. Pods already practice cooperative care and coordinated rescue among their own kind, so extending that recognition across species lines towards something that's been floating around slowly and non-threateningly for generations isn't actually that big a leap.
If this kind of thing fascinates you as much as it fascinates me, this is exactly the kind of deep dive this channel lives for. So if you haven't already, now's a good time to hit subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from.
Let's talk birds for a second, because bird behavior around humans is wildly underrated in this conversation. There are documented cases of magpies, crows, and even raptors bringing injured or abandoned chicks towards specific humans who've previously shown caretaking behavior. Crows especially, because crows have a memory system that would honestly embarrass a few humans. They can recognize individual faces for years, hold what looks suspiciously like a grudge against people who've wronged them, and extend something like loyalty toward people who've helped them. And here's the wild part. That trust seems to get passed down. A young crow raised near a parent who treats a certain human as safe appears to inherit that judgment before ever interacting with the person directly.
Which raises a real possibility here. Some of this isn't individual trust at all. It might be socially inherited trust, passed down the same way a kid absorbs which neighbors are the nice ones without ever being told outright. Real quick, genuine question for the comments. Which animal on this list surprises you the most so far? The cats, the whales, or the crows? I'm curious where people land on this one.
Now let's talk about dogs, because this is where the story gets almost unbearably wholesome. A mother dog who trusts her owner will often carry newborn puppies over one at a time and deposit them at that person's feet, like she's making deliveries. This isn't random sentimentality. Dogs have spent roughly 15,000 years evolving alongside humans, specifically around cooperative care and shared resources. Somewhere deep in dog psychology, humans got permanently filed under pack member, and pack members get access to the puppies. It's not a glitch. It's the entire point of how the relationship was built. And that same wiring seems to leak outward sometimes. There are documented cases of wild wolves, coyotes, and foxes showing unusually low fear responses around specific humans in areas with long histories of low conflict coexistence. Feeding stations, minimal hunting pressure, generations of quiet, non-threatening encounters. It's not domestication exactly, it's something adjacent to it. A slow-building familiarity that occasionally produces behavior you'd only expect from a fully domesticated animal. Elephants might be the most emotionally devastating example in this entire topic, and I say that fully aware I've been narrating all of this with a fairly light tone. Elephants have famously long memories and form deep, multi-generational bonds within their herds. There are numerous documented cases of herds approaching specific humans, conservationists, rangers, sanctuary workers, with an injured or orphaned calf almost as if requesting medical help. In several sanctuary situations, mothers have essentially presented a calf to caretakers, stepped back, and waited, sometimes for hours. What makes this even wilder is that elephants appear to remember individual humans who helped them or their herd for years, sometimes for the animal's entire lifetime. There are stories of elephants recognizing former caretakers after a full decade apart, reacting in a way that looks a lot like genuine emotional recognition.
If an elephant can hold on to a specific positive memory of one human for over a decade, it's honestly not surprising that same elephant would eventually decide that human is a safe option when a calf needs help. Okay, pause for a second, because you're probably starting to notice a pattern here, and it's worth naming directly. Nearly every example so far involves animals with unusually strong memory, social complexity, and some history, even an indirect one, of low-threat interaction with humans. This isn't random. It's closer to a slow-building cross-species trust algorithm, built case by case, generation by generation.
There's also a less romantic layer worth mentioning, honestly. Instead of just leaning into the warm, fuzzy version, sometimes bringing a baby to a human isn't a deliberate, thoughtful gesture at all. Sometimes it's closer to desperation. A mother facing a predator, a flooding den, or an injury she physically can't treat may simply gravitate toward the nearest large, slow-moving, non-predatory shape around, which awkwardly tends to be us. We're big, loud, and smell like campfires and questionable snack decisions, none of which reads as predator the way an actual threat scent would. In a moment of crisis, the trust a human option isn't always trust. Sometimes it's just the absence of a worse alternative. But even desperation-based trust still requires the animal's brain to run a risk calculation that we, historically, haven't fully earned. The fact that approach the human consistently beats do literally anything else during a crisis still says something remarkable about how animals have recalibrated their threat models around us over time. There's also a scent and chemical signaling angle that doesn't get discussed nearly enough. Humans carry a distinct, recognizable chemical signature, somewhere between soap, sweat, food residue, and whatever detergent happens to be popular that decade. Animals with strong scent-based memory, which is most mammals, appear to catalog specific human scent profiles the same way they'd catalog a known, safe member of their own group. Once a scent gets filed under safe, it can apparently stay there for an absurdly long time, which helps explain why some of these baby-delivering moments happen after only a handful of prior encounters. And then there's something even bigger tying all of this together. Humans seem instinctively wired to recognize distress signals across completely unrelated species. Research suggests the pitch, urgency, and rhythm of distress calls share enough structural similarity across many mammals that we instinctively respond, even to calls we've never heard before. A crying human infant and a distressed puppy trigger remarkably similar responses in adults: faster heart rate, immediate attention, and urge to help. Some researchers think this sensitivity might not be limited to our own species young at all. It might be a broader, somewhat leaky caretaking instinct that occasionally fires for other species' offspring too. Honestly, pause for a second here, because I want to hear your take. Do you think this caretaking instinct is something built into us biologically, or something we learn? Comment section's open. I'll be reading through it later.
There's also a documented pattern in primates that hits a little close to home. Wild and semi-wild chimpanzees, bonobos, and certain monkey species near long-term research stations have brought injured or orphaned infants toward familiar researchers. This tracks with something called alloparenting, where infants are cared for not just by their biological mother, but by a wider network of trusted group members. Extending that same logic to a long-term, consistently calm human observer isn't actually that large a cognitive leap. There's an entire body of research around something called the human safe haven hypothesis, a
fairly academic name for a genuinely fascinating idea. It suggests that across multiple independently evolved social species, individual animals can form something structurally similar to an attachment bond with specific humans, the same way a frightened toddler runs toward a parent instead of away from danger. If an animal has formed even a rough version of that bond, bringing a vulnerable baby to that person during a crisis stops looking strange. It starts looking like exactly what you'd expect from a creature seeking its version of a safe haven.
It's worth being clear that none of this trust is universal or unconditional. Animals with consistently negative human contact, heavily hunted populations, species in high conflict regions show none of this behavior. This pattern shows up almost exclusively in populations with a history of low conflict coexistence, or in species with the memory and social cognition to make nuanced individual judgments, rather than judging our whole species at once. In other words, animals aren't trusting humanity in general. They're trusting you specifically, the one who moved slowly, who didn't scream and bolt the last time something wild and unexpected showed up nearby. So why do animals bring their babies to humans? Not because we've earned some universal trust from the animal kingdom. Our track record is far too messy for that. It's because across an enormous range of species and situations, individual animals have built individual case files on individual humans. And some of us, enough of us, keep passing the test. Every slow approach to an injured animal, every bowl of food left out, every calm response to something wild and frightened becomes a small entry in an evolutionary ledger we don't even realize we're contributing to.
And there's one last layer to this that rarely makes it into the conversation, and it might be the most quietly meaningful part of the whole thing. This changes us, too. Rangers and researchers who've lived through one of these moments often describe it as one of the most meaningful experiences of their careers. Proof that the slow, thankless work of building trust with wild populations actually means something on the other end. Conservationists have started treating these trust-based interactions not just as heartwarming footage, but as real indicators of ecosystem health and human-wildlife relationship quality in a given region. A population willing to approach humans during a crisis is usually one living somewhere with lower hunting pressure and a longer track record of coexistence instead of conflict. So the next time you see a dolphin nudging an injured calf toward a boat, or a stray cat parading kittens onto someone's porch, or an elephant herd standing patiently beside a calf waiting for help, don't just file it away as a cute animal video. File it away as proof that every once in a while, across a planet full of species that have every reason to fear us, we've somehow convinced a few of them we're worth the risk.
If this one got you thinking differently about animals, or if you've got your own story about an animal trusting you with something small and vulnerable, drop it below. I read all of them, and honestly, some of the best ones end up shaping future videos. And if you want more of these deep dives into the science behind the bonds we don't fully understand, subscribe and stick around. This is just one thread in a much bigger rabbit hole.